Critical thinking is complex. It's not something we learn in the blink of an eye. But why is it so complex? And why are even smart people often wrong? Let's ask.
Now, even smart people easily make mistakes. Even experts can commit fallacies, mental mistakes. In fact, I even have to tell you that being smart is not necessarily something that protects you against uncritical thinking. It's paradoxical, but you'll understand it. Being smart makes it possible that you come up with smart arguments to defend an opinion that's wrong. So you came up somehow with an idea about reality or people or whatever, and you're convinced that you're right, okay, for one reason or another. Maybe it's something from your childhood, and in your childhood you did not have yet the knowledge and the skills mentally that you have now. But that idea always was in your mind somehow. And now you're older and it's part of your identity and you're not willing to give it up. Although you're confronted with information that says, oh, you need to reconsider that idea from your youth, whatever. You're not willing to do that for what you would call, in a sense, existential reasons. It's part of who you are. So then what you're going to do? You're going to look for arguments to defend that idea. You're not willing to give it up. And now the smarter you are, the better you can do that. So being smart is not necessarily something that protects you against uncritical thinking. On the contrary, it can make the problem worse. Of course, not being smart also won't help you. So that's one reason why it often goes wrong. Another reason is that we approach the world and each other from an intuitive point of view, but our intuitions are not very reliable. So don't trust your common sense about many things. It's not common sense that the whole universe originated out of nothing, the Big Bang Theory, but it's probably true. It's mind-boggling. Nothing in my common sense approach will tell me, oh sure, 13 billion years ago, the Big Bang, sure, and out of nothing, poof, a universe. It's ridiculous, but it's probably true. To sum this up, you can look at it from that perspective. We have bugs, just like a computer program can have bugs. We have bugs in our cognitive skills. We think our reasoning goes well, logically and well informed and all that, but there's bugs in our system. And it's very difficult to see the bugs that are there. Your brain is not necessarily capable of keeping track of the bugs in its own system. See my point?
So we have bugs, or fallacies, in our thinking. People often use fallacies, which are in fact wrong arguments. Maybe an example of one of the most common fallacies can help us to clarify this.
Optical illusions, and most of us are familiar with optical illusions, make that very clear. Sometimes, or in many cases, people cannot even accept it. I don't know if you're familiar with these optical illusions. Like, say, for instance, the checkerboard illusion. I don't know if you know that one. But the checkerboard illusion shows you a checkerboard with black and white squares, right, like a checkerboard. And then there's two squares called A and B, and they look different in shade. The one is dark and the one is more white, lighter in color, just like all the other squares are. But the truth is, these two squares have the same color. This is unbelievable, because no matter how long you look at it, they always look different, very different, clearly different. But if you cover all the other squares, almost miraculously, all of a sudden you see, wow, they have the same color, they're exactly alike. So the illusion comes forth because your brain is creating the color of these two squares by taking into account the surrounding squares. So it makes an estimation, so to speak. It sees, well, that's black, that's white. So this needs to be this needs to be that. It makes a statistical guess based on the best information it has. But it's wrong. Your brain makes a mistake. It's an understandable mistake. It's a fair mistake to make, so to speak. But it's nevertheless a mistake. And there's always people who don't believe it because they think what I see is what must be there. Okay? So now the analogy is that many people think, well, I reasoned it out, that's the way I think of it, the one leads to the other, and so on, so that this needs to be right. Many times we're wrong.
Optical illusions can confuse and deceive us, but I assume that's not the only common fallacy.
It's called, the example I'm thinking of is called the Linda problem. And it's an example of the way that we go astray in thinking about probability, about the odds. What is more likely, this or that? So we somehow make a calculation and then we say, this is more likely than that. And we often make a mistake. Okay, the Linda problem is a good example. Okay. Linda is a woman, just picture Linda, is a woman, say, in her 40s now. And when she was younger, she studied, say, philosophy. And she had really good grades, and she's very smart. She made a brilliant dissertation as a student in philosophy. And also, while studying philosophy, she was part of a protest movement against nuclear weapons. I'm talking of Linda in the 80s here. So she marched with many other people against nuclear weapons and so on. She was very socially engaged. Okay. So Linda is now much older, 40s, 50s or something. So now I'm asking you, what is more probable? That A, Linda is a bank teller. She works in a bank, period. Or B, Linda is a bank teller and she's an active member of the feminist movement. What is more likely, A or B? I'll tell you that most people think that the answer B is most likely. Well, the correct answer is actually A. Linda is a bank teller, period. Why is that more likely? Because the answer B also says Linda is a bank teller, same thing. But it adds additional information. She's active in the feminist movement. Well, if you think about it, that makes it less likely that this person is Linda. The more details you give about Linda, the lesser the probability that it describes the Linda I'm thinking of. If I already know that she's a bank teller, then that's it. That's your best answer. You see the logic here? So what our brain did when you made the mistake, it switched, according to Kahneman, it switched the question, what is more likely, A or B, to another question. The question, which description fits best the Linda that I have in mind? But that's not the question that was asked in the first place. You see the point here? Okay. So there's many other fallacies like that explain why we so often make mistakes. I'm going to give you a few more examples, okay? For instance, in a discussion, in an argument, or when somebody gives a speech or whatever, and he or she wants to make clear that his or her opponent is wrong in what he or she is saying, they could use an argument that's called an ad hominem argument, meaning you say something negative about the person. Because you know somehow that many people will think, well, if this is a bit of a bad person, then his or her opinion also must be bad. But the one has nothing to do with the other. You could be a serial killer and you could be correct in most of what you're saying. See the point? So that's a very common fallacy. that we somehow mash up the person with the opinion that the person has. But you have to take it apart. The one thing has not necessarily to do something with the other. Okay? So that's an obvious example. More complicated examples are, for instance, the so-called availability heuristic. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's also something that Daniel Kahneman and other people describe and did research on. It's a strange phenomenon. It's really a truly authentic cognitive fallacy. What it does is what it describes is this. The availability heuristic, a heuristic is, you could say, a mental shortcut. It's the way your brain comes up with something, right? It's a shortcut in your thinking. And the availability heuristic describes that you come up with something based on what's available. It could be anything. It's also called anchoring. You know, like a ship has an anchor and it drops the anchor and there it stays, right? Say if we discuss the price of something, I want to sell you something. I want to sell you my car, all right? And you ask me, well, okay, well, how much do you want for your car? I'm going to anchor something. I'm going to say I need $5,000 or euros, okay? And that's the anchor. From there on, we're gonna reason, right? But I just made it up. I need 5,000 euros quickly. So I'm gonna sell my car and I'm asking 5,000 euros for it. But maybe it's only worth in reality 2,000 euros, okay? But I dropped the anchor, 5,000 euros. Okay, now you're saying, well, I'm gonna think about it for a while. And you look for a similar car somewhere, and you see one on the internet that's for sale for 8,000 euros. What are you going to think? You're going to think, well, the other guy, me, that's a cheap deal. He's only asking 5,000 euros, right? You have that figure available in your head, the 5,000 euros. I gave it to you. And so from there on, you look at other prices, right? This is your point of reference now. While in reality, it's just arbitrary. I made it up on the spot because I happen to need 5,000 euros. If I needed 10,000 euros, I would have told you I need 10,000 euros. And then you see the other car, 8,000 euros. What would your opinion be then? You would say, 8,000 euros, cheap car. While in the first example, you're thinking, this guy is crazy. He's charging 3,000 euros too much. So it's just floating around in your head. It's not an objective calculation or anything. The only points of reference that you have, your anchoring, is what happened to be available. The price I gave you, the set price, but that in itself is an arbitrary thing. You see the point? So that's a fallacy, the availability heuristic fallacy. And there's many other examples. So there's many bugs, so to speak, in our cognitive capacities. Now, the obvious lesson here is, if you don't want to make these fallacies, if you want to think critically and clearly and coherently, you have to study them. You have to study the fallacies, and you have to be able to recognize them in other people, and even more especially, of course, in yourself. And we have to realize it's much more difficult to see them in yourself than in other people. See, it's much easier, which is a strange phenomenon in itself, to understand the mistakes other people make. Of course, people make mistakes, you're going to say. But somehow in the back of your mind, your brain is telling you, except you, of course. Well, this cannot be true. But the funny thing is, that's the way everybody's thinking. Sure, everybody made mistakes. I see it every day. Just read the letters in the newspapers of angry people, and you can see through their mistakes. Then you write the letter and you tell, oh, but I don't make them. Of course you do. We all have the same brain in a certain sense. See, we all come up with fallacies, defending biases in many cases.
Can you come up with some other fallacies? Which one do you often hear in speeches or read in news articles? And how do you respond to those fallacies? We'll talk about it in the next video.